In today's tutorial, I'll be going over this step-by-step process as well as some fundamentals and how you can make this painting in Procreate. So let's get into it. All right, so as usual, before we begin, I'll share the canvas dimensions. I am using a 3700 pixel by a 2700 pixel canvas, and the color profile is an sRGB, as you can see up here. And for the brushes, I'll be using the Creative Space Basics brush pack. And this is a free brush pack on my Patreon page. It's just got these 8 brushes here. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to go there and download it and just import it into Procreate. Again, it's free, and I'll explain how to use these throughout the painting. Okay, so the first thing I can do is I'm gonna pull out the color palette here and just keep it at the top right. And we're gonna be on layer 1 for the sky. So just make sure you're on layer 1, and I'm gonna grab the airbrush here. You could use any airbrush to do this. It doesn't have to be from my brush pack, but just make sure you have an airbrush selected and select a cooler, lighter color somewhere up here. And I'm just gonna paint in the whole background or the whole canvas with this color here. Kind of the mid part of the canvas here, I want to get some warmer colors in where the sun is going to be. So I want a warmer feel, but I don't want it to be too warm, like a really warm sunset. So we want kind of a cooler sunset. And to do that, I'll go to the warms, but I'm going to keep it more towards the reds and the desaturated reds rather than the yellows and oranges. And I'm going to select a very light desaturated orange red. And we're still on layer 1, and I'm still using the airbrush here. I'm just gonna paint in a kind of a soft glow here in this mid portion of the canvas. And I'm gonna have it extend out horizontally on the left and the right sides as well. And we just have these horizontal streaks going outwards. And this mid part right here can be a little bigger, like a little more thick in this mid part. And now we have this light orange in. But I want some more transition or some more color variety. So in the middle here, we can make this part even lighter, and maybe we'll push it even warmer, more towards the oranges and the yellows. And I'm just gonna paint this lighter color in here. Again, just using the airbrush to do this. Maybe we can get that lighter color very subtly into the edges as well. And along the edges, this can be a good chance for us to get some more color variety in here. So right now we just have this blue, the orange, and this lighter yellow orange. So I'm going to sample this orange here, and I'm going to push it more into the pinks and the purples, maybe a little more saturated. So to get more color in here, the sunset is kind of happening right here, but along the edges, we can have more of a fall off transition. So we have more warmer colors in here, and as the light falls off, maybe we can get some pinks and purples along the edges, the further parts away from the lighting. And along the bottom, I'll have maybe like this desaturated purple, pink color. Everything that we do, I'm just trying to keep it pretty gradual and subtle. I don't want any harsh transitions right now. And so now we have this placement in here. It's just kind of a general composition that we'll add more to later. We'll move on to the next step, which is to go up to the layer panel, make a new layer above layer 1. And I'll go to the brushes, and I'm going to select the flat paint brush, and I'm going to choose another blue color. But this time it's going to be more saturated and slightly darker than the sky. And these are going to be mountains that we're going to paint in. So I'll start painting at about the bottom third right here. This general value should be good. And I'm just going to paint this horizontal paint streak going across the screen like this. And then we can add more to the silhouette here. Again, these are just going to be distant mountains in the background of the scene. And so once you have a line like this that looks good, like a silhouette of some mountains back there, then we can fill in the bottom below it. And if you need to, you can go in and clean up some of the edges, but it doesn't need to be too detailed since it is pretty far away. Now we have these mountains in, we can go up to the layer panel and make a new layer above that. But this time I'm going to have a kind of a mid-ground grass area. So I'm going to choose a cooler green color. We'll just push this slider into the greens and keep it cooler. So more towards the blue greens, right? So something about here should be good. And I'm going to make this less saturated. So maybe something like this, maybe a little darker than that. So something like this should be good. We can always change the color later, but I'm just going to paint in going to about right here up to the mountains. So we still want the mountains to show along the horizon, but we want this green, this mid-ground grass layer to come in and just go to about right up there. So I guess about the bottom third of the canvas as well. And we'll just fill that in so it's a solid color. And then we can start to get in some more value and color variety onto this grass layer. So I just have this green sampled and I just pulled it a little bit darker and we can start painting in. And so the grass that's closer to us in the foreground is going to need to be darker. And the further out towards the horizon that we get, the lighter and less saturated the grass will be. So just try to keep that general idea in mind when painting, is just the value structure of closer to the viewer, closer to the camera, the darker the grass will be. And that's usually how it is. So it's not always that way, but a lot of times if you have that rule in mind, you can have a nice value structure and it can feel realistic. So I'm just getting in this darker value. We're only using two values here. We have this main grass value that we painted earlier, and then we have this darker green, slightly darker, that I just added in. We're going to slowly start to introduce more, but right now I'm just trying to see how far I can get just using these two values. And I'm keeping these paint strokes horizontal, again, just using the flat paintbrush here. Still haven't changed brushes. I'm just keeping these strokes horizontal. And the further towards the horizon we get, the thinner the paint strokes should get. And the closer we are to the viewer, the thicker the paint strokes should get. And that will help us create a scene that feels like it fits in perspective, right? If all of our paint strokes are the same width throughout the whole scene here, then it will feel really flat. So just try to have some variety. The closer to the horizon, the flatter and thinner the paint stroke should be. And I'll give some more color variety in here. So I'll just maybe have slightly warmer green. So it's more towards the yellows. I think we could go even darker than that. Maybe something like this. And just, again, using the flat paintbrush, and I'm just having these quick vertical paint strokes, and you can see it adds like a little grass texture along the edge of the brush there. That's one of the reasons I like this brush. And I'm just getting in these colors here. Maybe we'll go more into the blues. And so this, building up this grass is going to take some time, but just have some patience with it and stick with it, because it may be messy at first. Like I think mine is pretty messy right now. But if you, it's kind of one of those things you just have to stick with. And if you pay attention to your values, and if you are just steadily, slowly building this thing up, then it will eventually start to look good. And so I'll switch to the round brush and just lightly paint here just to get in value shift. Just have it be a little darker up here on the right side. And I'll do the same on the left side here. And so I'm not worrying about texture or anything yet. We'll get to that later. I'm just really trying to get a good value structure in for the grass. And if I can get a good value structure in, then I know that everything else should fall into place, right? But the value structure is really important because we need this to read well. And if you want, you can go up to the brushes and select the airbrush and just have just airbrush the bottom just very softly, just to get more of a gradual transition from this lighter part of the greens down into the darkness, down into this darker area. So I'll switch back to the flat paintbrush here and just get more of this green, this darker green in here. Maybe I'll have a horizontal line, a horizontal dark streak going right here. And I'm thinking this could kind of be like the bottom part of some of the grass. And then in front of it, what we can do is make a new layer. So go up to the layer panel and make a new layer. And I'm just going to use the selection tool here. And I'm going to go right under that bottom horizontal streak, make a selection. So I'm just drawing this using the freehand tool, the freehand selection tool. Complete this selection. So go back to the gray circle, tap on the gray circle there to complete the selection. I'll sample the sky color and I'll make it darker, just a little darker. So somewhere about there. And I'll just paint this in maybe a little darker than that. And so maybe this could be like some water, or maybe like a little trail that has some water on it or something. And maybe I'll add more to it as well. So I'll go to the selection tool again, set it to freehand, and just start to draw in just to have some more perspective and depth. So maybe this trail comes towards the viewer here and kind of curves like this. And so I'm doing these two selections here, and then I'm leaving this middle part not selected. So you can see once we paint it in, you'll see what I mean. So it's kind of like these two trails, and then the middle part, there's still grass growing. And I think that looks fine. Maybe I'll add more to the edge of this selection here, just adding on to the shape there. And if you need to subtract from the shape, you can erase from some of the sides. So I'll go to the erase tool and I'll set it to the round opaque brush. And this is just a round brush that is completely opaque. And we can erase some of the sides if we wanted to have more of like a cleaner edged side here, or just take some of that out. And maybe I can erase some of the middle parts of it too. So maybe there's like some grass growing on the trail. That can work as well. So by doing this, what we've done is created these three sections of grass. So we have this grass back here, kind of in the midground. That's this lighter color. And we have these two areas of grass on the sides right here, which would kind of be the foreground. And so generally, these two in the foreground should be darker than this one in the midground back here. And we have this trail on a separate layer, so we can paint on layer 3, which is the grass layer. We'll go back to layer 3, and I can keep painting without messing up the trail that we've made since it's on a separate layer. So that's one of the nice things about digital art. We don't have to worry about being too destructive with things. And so along the edge where the bottom of the grass would be, so like right here, I'm having a darker area, since this would kind of be the roots of the grass. And I'll do this on this top side as well up here. The bottom of this grass where it kind of meets the trail is going to be darker. And so that's very similar to what we did up here with this horizontal line. And in fact, we can probably go back to this now and just start to clean up some of it. I feel like I made it a little too tall. So I'm just going to paint. I'll sample this color here, and I'll just paint along the top to kind of take some out of that shape. And so this is looking better, but I think this midground grass could be a little darker or could have more of a transition from the roots up into the grass. So I'm going to select the round brush, and you can use any round brush. I know Procreate has a default round brush. It works pretty similar. You can just sample this color here, this green, and I'm going to just softly wash into the paint above it. So I'm just very lightly pressing because I want my paint to be transparent or translucent, so it creates a gradient. I kind of like the effect that this gives, and I'm just softly washing up to about halfway, and then I think that looks better. So this is before, and now this is after with our new gradient on it, and it just feels more realistic to me. So now I'll go back to this front area here, these two front sections of grass, and I'm still using the round brush here, and I'm just going to paint in. I'll sample this darker color here and just keep on painting. So just trying to build up some form as well. And so this is a pretty flat field for the most part. But when I say form on the grass, I just mean like there's going to be some areas of grass, like for example right here, that are darker and maybe like they go up a little bit, or they protrude out of the ground a little bit more than the rest of the grass. And then along the edge, maybe I can have just a slightly lighter edge to it. And I'm thinking that could be some of the form of the grass here. So it's not just completely flat, but we do get some of that, some of the grass coming up and kind of popping out of the ground there. And starting to add a little bit more detail with this round brush in this foreground area here. Just adding in some round paint strokes, right? Just to be more of like a, maybe a bush down here, maybe some foliage or something. Then I'll grab an airbrush and just darken the bottom of that. It's just kind of like a stylized bush there. Some more darkness along the edges of the grass down here. And then I'll go back to the flat paintbrush and just continue to paint this grass. So maybe like right here, maybe we can have like a triangular shape along this bottom left of the screen. So maybe something like this, where it's just a little lighter. Maybe the top part of the grass is showing. One thing I will say, try not to get too complex or complicated with your values. So you can see I'm only using a handful of values here, and I haven't even shifted the color of anything yet because I'm trying to keep things simple. right now. I don't want this to get too complex or complicated early on. And the more values you start to add in the scene, the more complicated and difficult it can be to manage. And it can just make things look muddy and messy. So we're just really focusing on this, like, see this dark green here. We've got that value. We've got this one right here, this slightly lighter green. And then we've got this green here. And of course, we have some subtle shifts, like we've got these lighter ones up here. But for the most part, I'm not getting too complicated. So if you can try to keep your values within 3 or 4 values, that can really save you a lot of confusion and a lot of messiness. And that would basically just be grouping values, right? Limit and restrict your value options. And for those who don't know, when I say value, I just mean the brightness of the paint. So the lightness or darkness of the paint. So a higher value would be a lighter color, and a darker value would be a darker color. If we see on the palette here, up here would be a lighter value. This would be the lightest, this white. And then as you go further down, we get into the darker values. I'm trying not to get too detailed. I started to right here, but I had to kind of pull myself back from doing that. It's good to stay broad and general in the beginning, but later on is when we can have fun with the details. So it's good to just try to hold yourself back from getting too lost in the details early on, because we may change things, like a lot of times you may find that something doesn't look right and you need to just paint over a whole area. And if you spent hours working on details early on, then that's just a bunch of wasted work. So I find it really good to just hold off on all of that until you know that things are how you want them to be, at least. And so I just usually wait until later in the painting. All right, and I have a grass brush included in this brush pack. I'm going to go on a new layer above layer 3, just so we don't mess up anything. But we can use this to get in some darker kind of grass strokes here. So I'll just kind of tap this in certain areas to get in some foreground grass strokes. I don't want to use this brush too much because the texture can start to get repetitive or noisy. But I think just tapping it in here and there can give a nice little detail and just kind of build up some of the variety in paint strokes and textures here. But again, not doing it too much, just tapping it in every here and there, mainly in the foreground, because the further back we get, it would just get too noisy and detailed. All right, I'll go back to layer 3 now, and I'll go back to the flat paintbrush. And I'm going to start to work more on this mid-ground section of grass here. So I'll sample this color. It doesn't matter exactly which color you sample. I'm just sampling like a mid-tone green right here. And I'm just going to paint maybe a little lighter than that. That was a little too dark. Something like this. Maybe a little darker. Yeah, something like this. See, you got to play around with the colors and the values and just see how it looks on the canvas with all the other values and colors. Because it's hard to tell just by looking at the color palette what the color is going to look like on the canvas. So don't feel discouraged if you have to play around just a little bit to get that color looking good. I oftentimes just sample, like I'll put down the color and see how it looks, and if it looks good, then I'll start to paint with it. But it's kind of just like experimenting and testing with it, right? So we're just having, again, these horizontal paint strokes on this mid-ground part of the grass. They're thinner than the paint that we were painting in the foreground. Like I said earlier, as we get closer to the horizon, the paint strokes will be thinner. So just keep that in mind. They'll also be lighter. So of course, like we talked about with the value transitions, closer you get to the horizon, the lighter they'll be. Because see, if we do something dark back here, you can see it just feels like there's way too much contrast up here. But if we go to maybe this value, maybe a little lighter than that, so maybe this one, and we paint in here, now it feels like there's a lot less contrast because, of course, the atmosphere is getting in the way, atmospheric perspective, and it's just further away from the viewer. And I feel like that just goes a lot better, and it feels a lot more realistic. So, and I'll just collapse layer 5 onto layer 3 since I'm good with how everything looks there. So I'll now go to layer 2 and I'll make a new layer above layer 2. We're not done with the grass yet, but I kind of want to move on just to get some more elements into the scene, just to see how things will start to look. Maybe we don't even need to add much more to the grass, so let's just see. We'll go to layer 5, which is our new layer, and I'm going to select a round brush. So I'll just go to the round brush here, and again, you can use Procreate's round brush if needed. And I'm going to sample a cooler green, pretty dark color. I'm just going to select this here in the palette, and I'm going to paint in some tree shapes back here. So this layer is between the mountain layer and the grass layer. So this paint will appear between those two elements. And I'm just going to build up some trees between these two. And this is going to help us see where the grass line ends and where the mountain begins. It kind of just creates a darker value in between the two, which is going to be really good for just being able to tell what element is what. So similar to the mountain, I'm just kind of having these irregular shapes for the trees here. Just make sure it's natural. Make sure that it's not too repetitive. Make sure we have a variety of sizes and shapes. And I think that works pretty well. I'll go to the grass layer 3 and I'll just erase some of the edge here. You might not need to if your silhouette looks good, but I just try to cutting that off just to have it more level here. And I like what we have here. So now we'll go above layer 3 this time. So I'll tap on the plus icon to go above layer 3. In fact, I'll drag this above layer 4. So we'll have this layer above everything else. And I'm going to sample this dark color that we just used for the trees, and I'm going to make it just a little darker here. And maybe I'll push it more towards the greens. And so we're going to get in some small bushes and maybe a small tree that's going to be closer to the viewer. And I'll actually use the flat paint too, which is similar to the flat paint brush. It's just the tip of the brush follows the paint stroke. So it's the same thing, has a different feel to it. So I'll just paint down here in this bottom kind of left area some of these paint strokes here, just to get maybe some small trees, like very small trees, or maybe just some grass bushes or something like that. And maybe we can have a big tree right here, or just a bigger tree than what we've gotten in before. Maybe we can move it. If you need to move it, we can just use the selection tool. And since this is on a separate layer here, we can move it without having any problems. So just circle around it, make sure it's at the free hand, tap on a gray circle, and you can tap on the move tool and we'll just move it around. Maybe something like right here. And I will continue to add some smaller bushes. I'll sample this color and I'll make it a little lighter since we're starting to get further back towards the horizon, right? And I'll paint in more bushes. So these bushes that I'm painting in back here are lighter than these up here. These are darker. And that is pretty much what I've been saying, just about the having the values closer to the viewer be darker and the values further away be lighter. And I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's a very important concept to make sure that you understand if you're going to be painting landscapes and just having some realism to your landscapes. And again, it's not a rule that always applies, but a lot of times it does. And more often than not, you will find that there is this kind of value transition that I've been speaking of. All right, I'm going to select these bushes that I made. I feel like they're just a little too dark, and I'm just going to select them, make 2 selections around them, and I'll go up to the Adjustments tab, go to Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, and I'll just increase the brightness just a little bit, maybe by 2%. And I'll do the same for layer 5, which is these trees back here. I feel like they're too far to be that dark. So let's do the same steps. Just go up to the adjustments and increase the brightness. Maybe I'll increase the saturation too a little bit to about 52% brightness and 57% saturation. And now I think that they fit more into the scene. So this is before they just felt a little too dark, and now they feel a little better. But maybe I can get even more saturation into them. I feel like they felt a little dull or a little gray. So I'll just push that up to about 84, 85. And yeah, that's good. So now I'll go back to layer 3. I'm going to select the flat paintbrush, and I'm going to keep on painting this grass here. below this tree, we want it to be darker, where, you know, there'd be a cast shadow and the ambient occlusion from the tree. So make sure to get that in there under the tree. And we can start to get some color variety on this grass too. So right now we've used this same green for the most part, but maybe I can get some purples or some reds in here. So I'll go over here to the cooler reds or the warmer purples, right? And pull this more saturated, not too much, maybe just a little lighter. And we're just gonna have to test and see how it looks. Yeah, so something like this is good. And I'll just paint this in here. Maybe this is like a different colored grass or maybe some flowers or something. And I'll just do this in some select areas. Don't want to do too much of it, but having little areas of this pop of color can be good. And I'll also do this in these foreground areas, or the foreground, kind of these two pockets of grass as well. This time needs to be darker, and maybe I'll make it cooler, like a purple color. And I'll switch to the rectangle paintbrush, which is just like a square rectangle paintbrush. I mean, that's really what it is. And I'll just paint some of this purple in here. So just getting some color variety. The values are close enough to the greens to where it's not going to stand out too much or cause too much contrast. So that's just important. If there's one thing, just make sure that the values aren't too different from the greens if you're going to add in some color. And I will continue to just, we're on layer 3 still, just build up some of the grass values more, just using this rectangle paintbrush to paint in some grass texture. And I'm starting to get more detailed with the paint strokes now, more like grass. The paint strokes are getting smaller as well since we're getting more detail with it. So I'm decreasing the brush size. And there's so many different ways to paint grass. I mean, you could just use a grass brush if you wanted for the whole thing. And there's no wrong way to do it. This is just, of course, how I like to do things. I just like this kind of stylized, painterly feel. It does take some time and it takes some patience. But if you can stick with it and if you can give it that time and patience, then I think it looks nice. And if you are painting along and you do happen to finish and you use Instagram, feel free to tag me on Instagram, and I'd love to give your finished painting a look. I love to see whatever y'all make from these videos. It's definitely cool to see that. So just tag me. I'll leave my Instagram in the description as well. And yeah, I'd love to see it and see what you create. So at the bottom right here, I'm just, again, still using this rectangle paintbrush, and I'm just having these shoots of grass, these darker values in here come up. And this just will help create depth, I think. All right, and I'm just gonna use the airbrush here and sample this green right here and just softly darken this mid-ground grass, just along the bottom half of it. I feel like it was just too light. See, that's before and now after. And I'm just adding some more of these bushes here. Maybe I'll sample this color and just draw in some more pockets of detail, these little pockets of bushes. And it just fills in the scene and it makes it feel like there's just more going on. But just be careful with, whenever you add these bushes in, be careful with the density of detail. So we want it to feel nice, like the composition is distributed nice. The distribution of detail is nice, because otherwise things will become too noisy and just really messy. And I know I talk a lot about that on my channel, but that is a big thing for me, is just trying to make sure that we group things well and that we keep things reading cleanly and clearly. And that's a big part of composition, in my opinion, is just keeping things clearly readable and easy to know what the artist is trying to convey with their painting. And I've had a hard time in the past with details and just having a hard time making things feel clear and readable. So I really just try to focus on that. All right, and so one thing we can do before moving on to the clouds is we'll go to layer 4, and I'm going to create a new layer above it, and I'm going to tap on the layer and set it to clipping mask. And this is just going to make everything that we paint confined to the shape that is below it. So we can't break that silhouette. And now what I can do is sample this flat color here, and I'm going to go for the airbrush, make this color darker, and I'm just going to softly airbrush in the bottom part. So this is just going to make this value transition, not only on the grass, but also on this path right here. So now everything just feels like it fits together more. And if you go too much with it, you can just select the airbrush for the erase tool and just erase some out. Okay, and now we can collapse layer 7 onto layer 4 just to save layer space. And I'm just going to erase some of the edges. I'll use the round opaque brush with the erase tool and just erase some of the edges out on this path right here. Just have it feel a little more realistic. And maybe I can have this part right here, maybe in the middle, kind of cut out to maybe there's like grass or something growing in the middle right here. But just get creative with it. All right, I'll actually make another layer above layer 4, set it to clipping mask again, and get some details on this path. So I'm just going to sample this darker color here, and along the edges of the path, we should have them to be a little darker. So just like how we did that with the grass, so how the closer to the edge of the path, the grass gets darker, we can also do that here. And that's just a little bit of ambient occlusion, which is basically the darkest part of a shadow. And that is what's causing this darker line right here along the edges. It just adds some more value variety along the path as well, so it just doesn't feel as flat as it had previously. And I'll just get in some texture as well along the path, so maybe like some cracks in the ground or maybe like some little rocks or something. So now what I can do is we can finally start to get some clouds in here. So I'll go to layer 1 and I'm going to make a new layer above layer 1. So now we have layer 8 above layer 1. And we can select the cloud brush from the brushes there. And I'm going to sample the sky color. And we can make it slightly lighter and less saturated. Just a little bit. We don't want to do too much. And I'm just going to paint at the very top right here with this cloud brush. And just getting the general feel and the general shape of this cloud in that I want to paint. So we can kind of have it go down diagonally towards the sun or towards the lighter area over here. And maybe we can have some up here too. Okay, and now I'll make a new layer below layer 8. So I'll just go to layer 1 and tap on the plus icon. Now we have another one below layer 8. And now I'm going to get some clouds that are behind these lighter clouds. And I can sample the sky color again, and we're just going to make it just slightly darker, maybe a little more saturated. And something like this should be good. And I'll just lightly paint in the shape of some more clouds. And we can move them. Maybe I'll have them a little lower than that. Just have this shape, thinking it can kind of cover a lot of the sunset here. And I'll have it come out horizontally like this, just a streak of clouds coming out horizontally. And I'll go to the erase tool and set it to the cloud brush as well. And I'll erase some into the clouds just to take some out. So I'm just adding and subtracting to the shape just to get it how I want it to be. And maybe we can have it come all the way off the canvas here on the left side and just go horizontally across the bottom. And if you feel like the bottom is uneven, kind of like mine is, then we can just use the erase tool and just have it be as horizontal as we can get it. We want it to kind of be like a flat horizontal line. It doesn't have to be perfect, of course. This is a cloud, so it has some organic, natural kind of irregularity to it. Just softly erase up into it there. And then I'll continue to add on to the shape on the right side over here. And maybe we can have it under this cloud as well up here. And so I'm using this cloud brush as a placeholder. Kind of just to get in the composition of the clouds. This isn't how I want the final clouds to look exactly. They will look close to this, but I do want to get in some harder edges and some more refined details later on. But right now, this is just to kind of get this soft placeholder in for what we can then add on to later. And your clouds don't have to look exactly like mine if you don't want. That's fine. You can really do anything that you want. I'll go to the cloud layer above it, so layer 8, and I'll just keep on working on these, which are these lighter clouds that are closer to us, closer to the viewer, and I'll just keep on working on these shapes here. Okay, so now we have these cloud shapes in. Now we can start to refine the actual edges and add some detail to the cloud. So I'll go to the round brush And we're starting off on layer 8. So these are the lighter clouds here. And I'm just gonna sample this color that we've painted, and I'll just refine some of the edges using this round brush, and maybe add some extra detail on the outsides, just some smaller clouds, refine the edges. So maybe I can just slide the color more towards the whites and paint in some more clouds here. Just going to create some depth and some overlap with these clouds. Similar to the grass, try not to get too complicated or complex with the values. So now I'll go to layer 9 and do the same thing here. Just add more detail using the round brush and clean up some of the edges of these clouds. Have some harder edges here. I'm going to save some of the soft edges because I think that just keeps a natural feel for the clouds, but introducing some harder edges as well to have some variety. Just sample this blue color here and bring it darker and just paint in along the bottom here. It's very subtle, so we don't want too much contrast, but just to have a subtle darkness towards the bottom should work. Here, I'm just still using this darker color, and I'm just gonna paint up into the clouds. Again, I'm just still using a round brush, just kind of carving out some shapes here to have some areas maybe where there's a shadow from these clouds, and just to create some more form. I don't want to get too complicated or complex with the form either, because these clouds are far away and we're really seeing mainly the silhouette of the clouds. So we're not going to see all the intricate little details and all the form too much, but if I can get an indication of the form, then I think that's nice. Just add some more believability to the clouds to where they're not completely flat, but they do have a little bit of form. All right, so now what we can do is go back to the sky layer, and I'm going to select the flat paint 2, which is just a paintbrush that follows the stroke of the pencil. And I'm going to just sample the sky color and maybe just get some more saturation and just some more texture into some of the sky. This is optional. If you like the sky to feel kind of airbrushy and soft, then that's fine. There's no problem with that. But I just want to get some more texture in here, so I'm just going to paint in some of this. Also getting some more color and value into the sky as well. And we can smudge some of it out just using an airbrush if we need to. But especially along the sunset, I want to refine that a little more. I'll switch to the flat paintbrush here, and I'll sample this light color here, this light orange, and I'm going to make it a little more yellow, maybe just closer to white, and I'll just paint in here using that color and using a flat brush. So we're getting some harder edges along the sky as well. And we can smudge some of those out, again, just using the airbrush on the smudge tool. And so then I'll select an airbrush using the brush tool and just get some darker parts below these clouds right here. So I'm thinking this bottom left can be kind of darker. Maybe I'll sample the cloud color and just maybe the bottom right side as well, just to kind of center the focus more towards the center area here where the sunset is. And I'll go back to the flat paintbrush and I'll just continue to work up this sky layer. So again, we're just on layer 1, and I'm just cleaning up some of the sky layer to make it feel a little more like a sunset, and just had to have it feel a little less just like the airbrush feel like I did earlier. I personally don't like that feel too much in my paintings. I just want it to feel a little more painterly. But again, do whatever you feel like, whatever you like to do. So if you like the airbrush feel, then by all means, go with that. I'm just going to get in some more color in the sunset as well. So it was kind of just orange and really just orange, but now I'm getting some of these lighter pink colors too, maybe some reds as well, just to increase the color variety and just have some more interest. And And I'll be using a variety of brushes to do this. The round brush and the flat paint brush really are the main two that I'm using. And I'm just gonna build up some more detail along the sunset. Just introduce some more colors as well. All right, so one more thing I'll do to these clouds, layer 8, I'll go to layer 8 and I'm just gonna go up here to the adjustments tab and go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm just gonna turn down the brightness by about, I'd say 2%, so 48 should be good. I feel like they were just too bright. Again, it's one of those things, once you start to get in more color and value, I just noticed that I feel like they could be a little darker. I'll create a new layer above layer 6 and set it to clipping mask. And I'm gonna select the flat paint 2 and I'll sample this color here and I'm just gonna make it slightly more green and just a little bit lighter. And I'm gonna paint in some form. So just so this tree has some three-dimensional feel to it. So maybe just something like this. And then what I can do is, once we have something that looks okay, I'll go in above that layer and I'll select the rectangle paintbrush and I'm just gonna get a brown color. So maybe like more of like a red, desaturated red brown right here, pretty dark as well. And I'm just gonna paint some branches coming off the edges of this tree just to get some final touches of detail on the tree there. All right, and then I can go back to layer 6 and use the erase tool, set it to the round opaque brush, and I'm just gonna erase in some of the sides of the tree just to clean up some of the silhouette, or just to kind of subtract from the silhouette a little bit and add more detail to the edges of the tree, just to have it feel a little more realistic and a little less like a paint blob. All right, and I will make a new layer above layer 11. And so this is above everything. And I'm just gonna go use the selection tool here and get some birds in the scene just for some final touches. So since we have the tree down here, the kind of the bottom right portion of the canvas, I'm gonna basically flip this to go to the top left portion up here and introduce some birds up here. And this is just gonna help with the composition. So I'm just trying to have a nice balance of interest and detail. And that's why I'm choosing to put them in this area. So then I can make some selections and I'll just fill them in. I'll sample the cloud color and I'll just make it a little darker and I'll just fill those birds in. And now we have some birds in the scene and it's kind of the opposite spot where this tree is. And I feel like that balances well with the composition. So we'll go to layer 12 and I'll make a new layer above that. And I'm gonna set this layer to overlay. So I'll tap on that letter N next to the checkbox and I will scroll down until we reach overlay, which is right here. And then we can just make sure that that's selected. So now it should have a letter O where the N was. And then we can go up to the brushes and choose an airbrush. And I'm gonna go to a warm orange, light orange color like this, maybe a little more saturated, maybe a little more red as well. And I'll just softly paint in along the edge of this cloud, so kind of in where this the sunset is happening, right? So just paint in along the edges here, and this will just kind of create like a burn effect or like a glow effect along the edges of the clouds here. And I'm not doing too much of this because the harder I press, the more intense it will be, and it'll start to look a little too strong, so we don't want that. I'm just lightly pressing, and if you do too much, you can always go to the erase tool and set it to the airbrush and just erase some of that out. But just a little bit of that helps just create some more atmosphere and more glow onto these clouds. All right, so one more little thing I'll do is I'll go down here to layer 7, which is the detailed layer of the path that we made. And I'll make a new layer above it, and I'm gonna make in some selections. So I'll tap on the selection tool, make sure it's set to freehand, and I'm gonna just draw in these freehand selections, which will be little puddles of water that will add some reflections to. So for right now, just get in some of these selections and then tap on the gray circle to complete the selection, and you can get in a bunch of these. And once you think you have enough, we can fill them in with a solid color. It doesn't matter which color. I'll just use a blue color here. It's just a placeholder, so it's not going to be this color. So now that we have the shape of the puddles in, what we can then do is go up to the wrench icon at the top left and tap on add at the top there. And then at the bottom, you can tap on copy canvas. So now the whole canvas, the whole scene is copied, and then we can tap on paste. And now we have the copied canvas pasted onto a new layer titled inserted image. And what we can do here is tap on that layer and set it to clipping mask. So now that will only show up on the puddles that we made. And from here, we can tap on the move tool at the top left, and down here at the bottom, tap on flip vertical. Just move it down a little bit and just make sure that it's centered. And so to make sure that it's centered, you can tap on the snapping tool. And these are my settings for the snapping tool. It basically just snaps the layer into place. So just make sure that it's lined up to the orange lines and just drag it down a little bit. We just want some of that sunset to appear in the puddles down there. And we can add some more detail to the puddles, maybe erase some out, maybe add some more to it. But now we have some reflection. And one other thing we can do to this reflection is go up to the inserted image layer, and we can tap on the letter N, and we can just turn down the opacity just a little bit so it's not as bright. And we can also go up here to the adjustments tab, go down to motion blur, and we can just drag down on the screen to increase the amount of blur that we add to the reflection. Like I said, we can go back to layer 15 and clean up some of the edges of the puddle if you need to, add some more detail to it. And I'll actually remove some of this out just to have just a few less puddles, but just play around with it until you find something that you like. All right, so one final thing we can do is make a new layer above everything else. And I'll make sure I have the round brush selected. Just get in some lighter purple flowers, just in the foreground here, maybe a little more saturated than that, but I just want to draw in these, just a few of them here and there. Just these lighter, these kind of dots of paint that will indicate flowers. Don't want to do too many of them, but just enough to fill in some of the foreground area. And then what I'll do is make a new layer above that, set it to clipping mask, go to the brushes, airbrush, and just get a darker purple and just softly airbrush the bottom ones. This will just create a value gradient along the bottoms. And we can just darken all of them, but the ones closer to the corners can be a little darker than the rest. So at this point, it's really just about minor details and refining what we have here. So nothing too major. I'm not going to make any major changes, but just add in some more, like for example, some more grass texture, maybe some more detail and texture to the clouds. But again, for the most part, it's pretty simple and pretty small changes. So hopefully this tutorial was able to help you out. Thanks for watching. And as always, stay creative.